You are listening to the Health Can't Wait podcast. I'm your host, Maggie Landis. And this week I brought another guest. I don't always have guests like back to back to back, but I did this batch of recordings with guests recently, and we were talking about some very relevant, like timely topics as other discussions were taking place in social media and in the news and stuff. And so I've decided we've got to broadcast these because I want this to be relevant. But I think that something I never predicted when I went into this profession a couple of decades ago is that I would be having to compete for people's brain space when they're getting health information on TikTok and Instagram. And that's basically where this conversation is going to start today. So you have probably heard about these injectable weight loss drugs, Ozempic, Wegovy. There's a whole group of medications that were originally basically designed for diabetics. And, oh, wow, some people lost weight when they were doing the clinical trials. And so you better believe that everybody glommed on to that idea. And now there are lots and lots of people trying to access these drugs. These are prescription drugs, trying to access these drugs from medical providers for off-label indications. And what's happening is some of the patients with diabetes that need the drugs for diabetic management, for which these drugs are designed and actually quite useful, can't get the drugs because the rich, fat-phobic people are like getting all the supply. So it's an interesting conversation about access and privilege, and again, the narrative about the quick fix for weight and how we've seen this a million times and they never, ever, ever work. I mean, it ends with some disaster where people have side effects that we didn't know were coming, like the fen-phen crisis. It ends with people, kind of putting all their eggs in this basket and making themselves bankrupt over this. And ultimately, when you stop taking these drugs, the weight comes back. That's how they're designed to work. Of course, the pharma loves that because if you have to continuously take it for the effect, they can tell people who are in their 20s and 30s to start taking these drugs and keep taking these drugs for presumably like 50 or 60 years. That's crazy making. That's totally bananas. So I have invited a guest today who works in the primary care space, Dr. Natalie Gentile. She's a medical doctor, an MD medical doctor. She also is a family medicine, not only family medicine, but lifestyle medicine physician, and she practices in a direct primary care model. She's in the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area, and she is one of those doctors that you wish was your doctor. She gives time and attention and ethical, evidence-based care to every single one of her patients, regardless of their health status, regardless of their ability to pay. She's also an entrepreneur, a mother. She is opening a brand new facility very, very soon called Rebel Wellness, and it is going to, I believe, be adjacent to her medical practice, and it's got fitness space for fitness instruction, yoga, it's teaching kitchen. I mean, how cool is that? So Dr. Gentile truly understands the concept of whole patient care and like this kind of holistic, I'm doing air quotes because I really hate the term holistic health, but really the approach to health from a completely comprehensive standpoint. And she helps her patients and their community there learn the how and why these changes can benefit them. But I invited her on here because she has patients who have experienced this problem with the availability of their diabetic medications. And she, fortunately, her patients, we're going to talk about a little bit, are pretty well trained to not be begging her for weight loss medicine. They know better than that. But I hope you're going to enjoy this conversation. And we do get a little ranty, but it is still clean language as always. So it's okay for little ears if you have them in the car with you or whatnot. But without any more ado, let's get into the conversation with Dr. Gentile on the flip side of the intro.
The number you have dialed has been changed.
Y'all, I'm changing, you're changing, and we are changing our cultural and clinical obsession with size right here. I'm Dr. Maggie Landis, a physician, public health nutritionist, and health at every size educator. We're doing the hard work here, friends. This podcast is going to challenge everything you think you know about health, nutrition, diets, and weight. I invite you to come for the science and stay for the sass. We are getting this done together because health can't wait. Well, hello, Dr. Gentile. Natalie, can I call you Natalie on the podcast?
Yes, you can, Dr. Landis. Thank you.
You know, I kind of never know, right? But
I love it.
Yeah, we are colleagues here, and we are colleagues in many, many ways. But I'm so excited for this conversation today because it's not every day that you find a couple of sort of weight neutral MDs in the universe in the same place.
Isn't that the truth? We're like unicorns.
I do feel a little bit like two unicorns meeting in the forest, but I'm so grateful to know you. And I think you have so much to contribute to this conversation today. But we're going to talk a little bit. We're going to talk about several things, but the main conversation is I want to talk about these newish drugs that everybody is seeing. Of course, if you turn on your TV, you see commercials for drugs. Ozempic, Wegovy. These the fancy schmancy word is a GLP-1 agonist, but that's kind of like nerd talk. We don't really have to talk about that. And I want to really make the distinction what the purpose of these drugs are, what they're indicated for, what is a legitimate sort of clinical application, and then how we got to where we are now with the recent off-label use for weight loss and cash pay people sucking up the drugs. But let's start by, can you explain on a real high level for a non-clinician, like what do these drugs do? What's the kind of point? What's the origin story of the use, if you will?
Yeah. So these GLP-1 agonists are nowadays being touted, mostly the injectable forms of them, are the ones that are getting a lot of the attention, but they've been around for a long time. For our diabetic patients. And we've used them, in the primary care setting. And then of course, our amazing endocrinology colleagues have been using them even longer,
right.
and with great success for our diabetic patients. And what they're helpful with, the way I kind of describe it to my patients is you're going to have decreased appetite. There's going to be slowing down of the process of, food moving through you. And so you're just going to feel fuller. But it also is affecting some of those hormones that tell us that we're hungry. And so what was found then, and what's getting so much attention now is like, hey, our diabetic patients are having better markers of, their diabetes control, but they're also losing weight. And in this population of diabetic patients who also tend to be in a higher weight or higher BMI category, when we're talking scientifically and healthcare wise, right? And the way we look at, we kind of are classifying patients in studies. A lot of them benefited from a diabetes control, also from the weight loss. And so now it's like, oh my God, there's this injectable med that we can help people lose weight. Let's use it for everyone. So I think that's kind of what we're going to talk about today.
Right. And I want to make the disclaimer. I should have said this first, but like Dr. Gentile and I are both medical doctors. We are not giving anybody who's listening to this health advice. You are not our patients. Even if you are our patients, you're not our patients right now listening to this. So do not stop or start or do anything crazy without talking to your own doctor. But okay, that aside. So, and I also want to mention, we are going to use the word obesity some because I don't love the categorization of patients based on BMI, but also this is how all the scientific literature is written. And it's impossible to have a conversation about studies and research without, acknowledging the categories that they have put patients into. So I just want to also give that disclaimer.
Exactly. I'm going to add to that disclaimer that probably the way we talk about it is not the way we talk about it with our patients, right? Like, so I don't use the term obesity when I'm talking my patients. I'm using different terminology or meeting them where they are with what their interests are. But the way we were trained and the way these studies look, and the way that the literature talks is very different than what we might be talking about in a weight neutral practice.
Right. So there's appropriate use for these drugs for diabetics. And I think from my understanding is it's especially helpful in diabetics that have renal problems because they sometimes can't take other some of the other medicines that are indicated for glucose control and stuff. So these are sort of safe for renal patients, is what I understand. Is that right? Is that accurate to say that?
Yes. And then also our patients that are on a boatload of medications for their diabetes, including insulin, which is also driving weight gain. We've got a lot of patients like that this can help reduce medication burden and the burden alone of insulin in some patients, and that's a huge quality of life issue.
Right. Okay. Because that's kind of a general practice of medicine, is we want to use the least amount of pharmaceutical interventions that we can to get our desired result. That's just sort of like, I think most physicians would say that that's how they try to practice, So, okay. How did this, so they did these studies for diabetics. They noticed that some of the subjects had weight loss as a side effect, and then they got all into this. I'm saying they being like, namely Novo Nordisk and other, pharmaceuticals, into, wow, there's a huge market for using this just for weight loss in patients that are not diabetics, specifically not diabetics. Is it fair for them to have made that leap? You see what I'm saying? Like, is that good? Like, in your opinion, is that a good, sound clinical jump to say weight loss is a side effect for patients with diabetes in these diabetes drugs? And so now it's a good idea to then, figure out how we can prescribe them to patients who don't. It concerns me using a diabetes medication in a non-diabetic patient, especially for a prolonged period of time, right? We don't really know what that means, do we?
Well, I guess there are other medications out there, as you and I know, that are, and initially were found to be indicated for one thing and have been helpful in others. And so we use them in under other indications. So an example is Wellbutrin, right? It's a great antidepressant, but hey, it also is helping people with smoking cessation.
Right.
And so, like there are meds out there, gabapentin, some of the anti-seizure meds, like think about it. Some of these medications do have multiple indications that we like oopsies found they were helpful in other ways, which is cool as a scientist, I think, right?
Sure.
I guess my answer to your question is it a good idea? It depends on what your end game is. Like when I have patients who are coming in who are desiring weight loss, and we are looking at their weight, and it is a point where I might agree with them, right? Like this would be a potential benefit for you. And we want the maximum effect, right, for what we're giving them. We've got a lot of meds out there for weight loss that are oral, that are not even like scratching the surface what these GLP-1s can do. So I guess it's really, what's the end game and what's the actual, goal and patient profile that you're working with to know if this is a good idea to use them even in our non-diabetic patients. But the point is right now, like Wegovy, can be indicated for weight loss, but these other ones are not indicated for non-diabetics.
Right.
So it's just not even, so like, I don't think it's a good idea right now to do something that's not indicated from an FDA covered researched perspective. And that's what we're seeing is people just getting these for funsies to go lose weight that don't actually have the indicated need for them.
Right. And they're prescription drugs. I mean, you have to get this from somebody who has licensing authority to write a prescription. So there's a physician out there or a licensed provider who's writing these. You can't just like order this from, Amazon or something. So that's really concerning to me, knowing that you and I have colleagues. You should see our faces right now. I know this is a podcast. Y'all can't see our faces, but there's a whole lot of like wide-eyed eye rolling.
There's so many feelings right now. Like, well, because to me, this is like another day of like least shocking things I've seen, right? Because in the end, I mean, look at testosterone. Like, let's look at something where we actually had clinical indications for people that had testosterone deficiency, and they were unwell from this, and we could treat them with something to help them. And now you've got these corner testosterone clinics that are just pumping everybody full of them, whether it's indicated or not. It's not hard to do. Scamming is not hard to do. Finding somebody who will prescribe something just because a patient asks for it is not hard to do, unfortunately, but it's reality.
Right. Well, okay. So, and I want to talk about using these GLP-1 drugs for weight loss. The study, and you may know more than I do, so I please, correct me if I'm leaving something out. But the STEP trial was kind of the main clinical trial where they were testing these drugs, specifically semaglutide, for weight loss. And I have some concerns about what I'm reading. All right. And the thing is that the average person, watching the internet, who wants to lose a little bit of weight, going and asking their doctor for these, I don't hold them accountable for like research methodology, right? I mean, that's a tall order, but basically this study was done over about 5.5 years, and there were a lot of side effects. I mean, there were a lot of people that ended up dropping out, primarily GI side effects and things like that. And the amount of weight that they were, the research, what do you call them, investigators, the primary endpoint was like people losing 5% of their weight loss, 5% of their body weight. And here's a quote directly out of their manuscript. It says, because 5% weight loss is a, quote, widely used criterion of meaningful response. Okay, now there's a lot of assumptions built into that, because somebody could make some changes or potentially even take a medication and improve their health and also not lose 5% of their body weight. Or somebody could lose 5%, 10%, 20% of their body weight and have no measurable clinical benefit. So weight loss as a proxy for health is still problematic. Is that fair to say that? Like, what's your take on that?
But I agree with you from a generalized statement. I don't think we can apply that to all of our patients, right? But in research, you have to, right? Like, you have to do something that's kind of a general blanket statement endpoint that you can work with. And for you and I in training, this is how we were trained. Like, this truly, like, weight loss is probably the most important thing you can help a patient with. Is what we were told. Is how I was trained. Yeah. Like, especially.
Well, and our consumers, our patients are also trained that way. Like, yes, I mean, culturally trained, you and I are professionally trained. They're like culturally trained. So, okay, so let's have that conversation, because I think there's a misunderstanding. I mean, you categorize yourself as a weight neutral practitioner, as do I, but that doesn't mean we never talk about weight. Right? Unpack that a little for us, because I think that's a misunderstanding, don't you?
Oh yeah, I had that misunderstanding. I was not always practicing weight neutral care. I hope that's okay to say on this podcast.
Oh yeah. Oh no, we weren't. Like, well, of course we weren't, because we weren't trained to do that. We were practicing what we were trained to. I was handing out the freaking food pyramid. I mean, come on. Like,
no, totally. And I really thought, I really thought that I was really helping people, right? And it's not that I was sitting there being like, you need to lose weight ever. Obviously, all I ever tried to do was compassionate care. But my messaging was like, if you can lose some weight, this and this and this will get better. And you know what? For some people, when they lost weight, they got better. And for a lot of them, they didn't. And for a lot of them, they didn't even lose the weight, right? Like, because the things that we were doing weren't actually resonating with them where they are. And so when I started to like shift gears and really it truly was a natural kind of progression in my practice. And I found out, oh wait, there's actually like a name for this. It's weight neutral care. And I really started thinking more about it and learning more about it. Then I thought, well, oh crap, I still have patients though who do want to lose weight and may benefit from it. I still want to help them with that. It can still be there for them. And so that is like an myth, right? About weight neutral care, that just because you practice weight neutral care doesn't mean you ever even utter the word weight or help a patient with weight loss, which is not true.
Right. Because it's pretty, I guess, dense to think that the patients are all coming in mostly wanting weight loss, with a cultural conditioning that is how they are going to get healthy, because that's the messaging they've heard. They've probably even heard it from other doctors, honestly. And so for us to just totally ignore that, like, we have to put ourselves in their shoes a little bit, I think, to then affect change and teach them what we do know about health at every size, and what we do know about weight stigma, and what we do know about weight cycling. And like, we can't expect them to come with the same, sort of background that like you and I do. I mean, and so, yes, patients want to lose weight, and I think it's ignorant for the doctors to respond like, well, that's not important. We know that's not like, because you've just like invalidated their belief system. And that's a dangerous road. And it's not going to lead to any more mutual respect or compliance or things we know that are useful.
It just continues to breed distrust, right? And lack of buy-in in that health, doctor-patient relationship. Right. Because you just feel dismissed. I have so many patients that come to me because I do direct primary care. So I'm outside of the traditional model, and I have all this time with patients, and I don't dismiss them because I actually have the time to get to know them. And what I've found with my patients, I sit down and say, okay, what do you want to get to today? For most of them, number one or number two is their weight. It just happens to be, I'd say if I had to pick, a percentage, the majority, it's the first or second thing they want to talk about. But then I ask the question, why? Like, why? What's the why? What's
magic.
Your why?
Yeah, that is seriously like the magic golden ticket, isn't it? Because I think that's where the solution is too, because we need to measure the why piece as the outcome. And that's what, I know, especially with your Rebel in Wellness, like you're about the doing piece, like the doing, like taking on health promoting behaviors, approaching diet and exercise and nutrition and things with like this sort of curiosity and creativity and, making it kind of work for you. That's like, to make it personal is the only way this works. Like, you have to connect with that why for that one individual person, because looking at a study that has, a few thousand people in it and looking at some bar graphs and saying like, oh, well, I want to, will you prescribe me this injectable drug because 80% of the people lost 20 pounds or whatever. That's not useful. Right. But you have to appreciate that that's where they're coming from.
Let's call it what it is. Like, these meds, they work pretty darn well, right? They work well. They do not replace all of the other stuff going on in your life, right?
Well,
they don't.
The study also paired it. That we should make that this thing that this 5-year-long study, the STEP trial, paired the use of these medications with lifestyle, quote, lifestyle interventions. And they had nutritionists working with these people, behavioral psychologists working with these people, exercise people. They worked out under supervision and stuff like that. So nobody, even the people investigating this drug, are saying the drug is the only answer.
But I think that people are going to hear that. They want to hear that it is the answer. That's the thing.
We wanted to hear everything was the answer. We have wanted to hear every single new drug, plan, diet, food product that comes to market is the answer. We're waiting for like the thing. Yeah. And like, I don't know, I've been watching this for several decades, as you have, and like, there's not a thing. We're waiting for like the second coming, and it's not happening because it's not a thing. And it's just one more place where, there's a lot of false hope, I guess. And then to see, particularly, we're talking like TikTok influencers and celebrities and people using a prescription medication off label for and I have to say, the people that I've seen, the sort of pop culture people that are bragging about using this drug, are not diabetic nor obese. All right. And that to me is even more problematic. Like, they're 3 steps removed from any potential useful intervention. And let's talk about the sucking up of the supply.
Yes.
So tell me how hard this is for your patients who could benefit from the use of these medications. What kind of uphill battle are you dealing with? Like in a real clinical sense.
Yeah. So like, real talk, it's a total crapshoot. Not sure. From person to person, it could be everything will be covered. No problem. Next person, none of these meds are covered at all. Sorry. Can't even appeal it. Insurance isn't going to cover it. I've had patients on Medicaid who desperately could benefit from this, and nothing is covered. I've had patients who are pre-diabetic, let's talk about, and, technically obese. Again, we're using that word from a, studies perspective, right? But
Right.
technically are in that category, pre-diabetic, the writing is on the wall, right? Like they're young. I'm looking ahead into this future of like, can we stop this now? Hey, I have an idea. Like, can we get ahead of things? Not covered at all. But then the next patient who is also pre-diabetic and technically obese, sure, their insurance says it's okay. So we cannot predict who can get it. And then, oh, by the way, we finally get it covered, but there's short supply. So then, what is concerning to me is, okay, let's have you use some free samples now, and then hopefully we can get your insurance to cover it. But what if they don't? Then you're off of this med and we've just, that's a moot point. Or
because they're very expensive. I mean, I want to make the point. These are very, very expensive. The stuff I read is that if you were to like cash pay for these, this is somewhere between $1,200 and $1,500 a month.
Correct.
Yeah. So that's a lot of money. The amount of people that can afford that out of pocket is a extremely small percent of our population.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
exactly.
But that's what I think people are seeing, like these sort of celebrity, I'm using this sort of influencer word, that are saying, oh, you guys need to get this. My doctor gave me this and I've lost however many pounds in however many months or whatever. And they've paid $2,000 out of pocket every month for it. Mm-hmm. That's, I feel in my bones like wrong about mm-hmm. every aspect of that, from the prescriber all the way down to this sort of like, TikTok video. Mm-hmm. It's a bigger conversation about like allocating our limited resources for people who would the most benefit from them, and mm-hmm. not those who can afford them.
And then also like those who have the quote best insurance, like we're just categorizing people based on their financial status, not on who actually needs these things a lot of the times. And that is enraging for me as a family doc, right? Like that really lights my fire.
Yeah.
because I'm seeing the people hurting from this every day. And I'm not a celebrity doctor. So,
no. You feel kind of helpless. I mean, you feel yes. like you can't do what you're supposed to do, which is deliver the most ethical, most evidence-based, compassionate, yep. patient-centered care. And you're like really like hands are tied behind your back in a lot of situations. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and the other thing too, is everybody should really know that we don't know over the long term, and I'm speaking specifically for weight loss, what is it seems to me like there's going to be sort of like a dependency on these medications. If you need them to then manage or maintain, some amount of weight loss, I mean, we're talking putting somebody on a drug at the age of 25 or 30 or 35, that's $1,500 a month that they're going to take for whatever, for 50 years. I mean, that's not without consequence, both financially and psychologically and clinically, because there's mm-hmm. side effects of these medications. Some we know quite well that are well described. Some we probably haven't even found out yet, because that's how mm-hmm. medicines work. There's a black box warning for endocrine neoplasias and history of thyroid cancer and stuff like that, because some rats got thyroid cancer, which I realize we are not rats. But I don't know. Nobody in the study group got thyroid cancer in 5 years, but if we give this to 300,000 people for 30 years, I don't know. Well, we don't know. Mm-hmm. We don't know. But it's really, it's just concerning, and it breaks my heart that like the use of these drugs for appropriate indications, and here you are like boots to the ground, mm-hmm. Doing primary care, and can't get the medication in the right patient.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
I know.
No, it's just plain and simple. That's why I just like raged on about it the other day on social media, because I just can't, like, seeing these articles about how it's the hottest thing in Hollywood is a slap in the face to the majority of our population.
Yes.
That could benefit from, if it's not this drug, it's another drug that's going to come along or has
sure.
been already,
Oh yeah. No, it is. And it's, I don't feel like it is fair to practicing clinicians that any drug, like you said, any drug is a quote, hot trend. Like we're not in hot trend. We're not making earrings and lipstick and cars. Like there shouldn't be like a hot trend because whatever does that language bothers me quite a bit.
I call it the sexy stuff, like what's hot and sexy lately as far as a diagnosis or medication or supplement, because it's always something. And what is so interesting to me is our culture now has this kind of undertone of like distrusting healthcare and like, we need to go more natural and like everything's over medicalized. Yet so many people want to over medicalize without knowing that they're doing that. Examples. Using these meds for weight loss, and paying cash for them with the celebrities. All of the supplements that are out there. Hey, spoiler alert, those are also over medicalizing. You're basically taking a med. It just doesn't have like a drug label on it. And it's not even studied. Right. So like
but it's natural. Yeah, natural.
Exactly.
What else is natural is like heroin. Like there's like lots of things are natural. Yes. So yeah, it is weird because there's this very mixed demand. I would say it's a demand because we have a lot of demanding interactions with patients. And it's getting more so that, our healthcare system is a consumer economy that in the patient's vision, this is like eating at Chick-fil-A, like they're the boss of their order and you're like, you're going to give me this. This is a whole, this podcast could go on for like hours, but I don't think prescription drugs should be advertised on TV because it's not the layperson's decision whether they should be on a prescription. You can advertise Tylenol and Band-Aids and stuff. That's fine, whatever. But like, I have a problem with that, a fundamental, like sort of philosophical problem with that. And drugs like this just like pour gasoline on that fire. I feel like.
I think a lot went downhill, and this is going to be a very unpopular opinion, I'm sure, for some. The moment we all became providers, things changed.
Yeah,
things changed, right? Because like you're exactly right. It is merely like, and a lot of it comes down to this big box medicine, insurance-driven system of customer service. Customer service is very different from patient-centered, evidence-based quality care. They are different things.
Yes. You know what? We need to have a whole, I'm not kidding around. We need to have a whole other podcast where that is the conversation, because that is.
Have me back, because I cannot even with that topic. Yes.
Okay. I'm writing it down. It's going on a Post-it note, which means it is like just as good as permanent. Yeah. I live and die by Post-it notes, but yeah, no, that is a misunderstanding. That is just a common belief. And it's hard. And it's hard to be it's hard. I have been a patient in some really adverse situations, and it is hard. This is a hard system for a patient to navigate, even an educated patient who knows the back end and how it works. So I get it, that it gets even more complicated for every layer of challenge, income challenges, social privilege challenges, race challenges, your zip code challenges, whatever. It's hard. It's hard to be a patient. It's hard to be a doctor. It's hard to be providing care and feeling like, we can do what we are the very best at doing.
Yep.
Okay. Well, you are the very best at what you're doing. So here's what I have a question for you. We have a little segment here called Truth or Trash. All right. And I just want your opinion. There's no right or wrong answer. Okay. But there's this, speaking of hot trends right now, there's this hot trend of people wanting to wear continuous glucose monitors who are not diabetics. What's your take on that?
Yeah. So I think that speaks to our over medicalization kind of thing, right? It's people, I want more data. What are you going to do with that data? Every time we test something or get data, you need to ask yourself, what am I going to do with it? And then the second question is, do I have the background to actually interpret this properly myself? Because if you don't, it's probably time to find a licensed, professional who does. And when we have non-diabetics using CGMs or continuous glucose monitors, there are going to be things coming up that are going to be abnormal potentially. And if that, ticks into you freaking out because something seems abnormal, that is going to unlock a whole Pandora's box of potentially unnecessary testing, unnecessary specialist visits, meds possibly, et cetera, et cetera. So just because you have data doesn't mean that it's going to help you. And when it's in the wrong hands, it can be unsafe. So right. I'm going to say trash.
Well, see, I think that too. And I like I've never thought of it as the over medicalization, but it really is, because, okay, great. You have all these like fancy readouts and graphs and stuff on your phone. And what? Like, unless you are a medical doctor or an endocrinologist or a dietitian or somebody who is trained to interpret that information, where are you? I guess I don't even know what they're thinking. Like they're going to decide that this glucose is too high and they need to, what are you going to do? Like do something? I mean, it's like, that's weird to me.
And where I have a problem is, again, when the answer is, what are you going to do? When the, what are you going to do is a company that sold you that CGM now has all of the options for you to manage it in supplement form and their, protocol that they created.
Oh, isn't that interesting?
X amount of money. Like when we start to get to that, follow the money.
Yeah.
Right.
Follow the
money.
Exactly. Well, and I want to make that point too. And with talking about this step trial, it's normal in a academic paper that the investigators put conflicts of interest. The conflicts of interest at the end of that paper is like a full page long in little tiny, 6-point font, because every single investigator is on the bankroll of one or more of these companies that stands to benefit. And I think, it's challenging because we need money to do the study. I mean, the doctors doing the investigation, the researchers aren't going to like pay out of their own personal checking account to run a study. So you have to get funding from somewhere. So I get that piece of it, but it muddies the water. And the whole point I want to make is that it's not as clear as you think it is when you see somebody on TikTok that says, ask your doctor for this drug, take this shot and lose 30 pounds in 4 months or whatever. Like, it's not that simple. If anybody goes away with that message, just know that there's way more to it. And we, above everything, want nobody to take on any additional risk that's not necessary.
And I will plug here for the importance of knowing what you deserve in your healthcare experience. Like, this is a conversation that you need to be having, if you have questions about this, or you're trying to decide if these types of meds, for example, are, fit your profile as a human. You deserve more than like 7 minutes with someone who's behind a computer and then rushes out of an office because they're, chained to the healthcare system. You deserve time and an educated conversation about this with a trained health professional who has a background in these types of issues.
Yeah.
So find it.
Yeah. And we realize that sometimes it's a privilege to access that, but if you have any way to access that, it's worth it. It's worth it because, we're talking about your health. And if you're, and also to say, even if you are not pursuing optimal health, you still are valued and deserve dignity and respect as a human being. But, I would say most people listening to this podcast and people showing up in your office and are interested in improving their health. And part of that is done by having a trust and relationship where questions are welcome, where a conversation is goes both directions. I think that's so important. And I'm so glad you do what you do. You are a gem. You are, you and I are unicorns, but you're way beyond that. You've got the diamond crusted unicorn horn. I'm telling you, if you're in Pittsburgh or spitting distance of Pittsburgh or whatever, you have got to look up Dr. Gentile. So tell us where people can find you, particularly if they're local to you, or if they're not local to you, what can they do to interact with you?
Thank you for the compliments. So on Instagram and Facebook, I'm at Natalie Gentile MD. I have a YouTube, Natalie Gentile MD, where I have a lot of real life simplifications of fitness and nutrition and lifestyle medicine stuff up on there as well. My practice is directcarepgh.com. And then Rebel Wellness is opening soon, and people who don't even live in Pittsburgh can virtually have access to some of our workshops through the Teaching Kitchen and our fitness offerings and mindfulness.
Yeah, that is awesome. That is, this is like a dream come true for you, right? To be able to put all these things physically under one roof and talk about, food and nutrition and movement and yoga and mindfulness and mental health and taking care of patients clinically, and like literally having it all under lock and key in one building is so cool. I'm so excited for that.
Thank you.
Might have to get to Pittsburgh is a long way from Texas, but I've been there. A little known fact, my mom actually grew up in Pittsburgh. Shout out to Baldwin High School, class of
Baldwin.
I don't even know if that place still exists. She graduated in the 60s, of course, but yeah, maybe it does. I don't know. Well, thanks.
You come visit me. There's a place for you here.
Oh, thank you. And I appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time and coming on the conversation today.
Thank you.
I'm so grateful you joined me today. If you're liking the science and the vibe here, I hope you'll tell a friend or two about this podcast. You can also follow me on social media at Maggie Landis MD, or check out everything that I offer and everything I do at my website, maggielandismd.com. The solution is us, my friend, because health can't wait.